one-way street. What about, one assumes, actually, looking at the series and reading your book as well, that one of the most horrific moments for you personally must have been going back to Auschwitz. Did you have to steel yourself before you did that?
Well, I wasn't very keen to go. I wasn't very keen to go because many of my relatives from Poland had died in Auschwitz. However, the point of the series was that it wasn't an entertainment, it was about life the way it is, the way it has been. And we just made up our minds to make it as true as we try to do everything in the series. That is, I said I'll go for one day, and during the morning we'll walk around, and in the afternoon we'll do the one piece by the pond that we know we want to do. I had never seen Auschwitz. You know, I had practically seen none of those places in the programs for reasons that I'll be happy to tell you about afterwards. But Auschwitz, I hadn't been to at all. We arrived at this station, which had been looked over by the producer in advance, so he knew what we should see. I went through these terrible wooden and iron gates that say Arbeit macht frei at the top, work makes free, to these unhappy people who went there to their deaths. And I looked at the gas ovens. I was particularly keen to see bunker 12 and 11, where people were beaten and shot for breach of regulations, because I sort of felt that you must see it all. But it turned out that the things that were far more moving were ones that I couldn't have imagined at all. The Germans are terribly methodical. So there would be whole areas which contained nothing but old spectacles. It's all been very carefully collected. There weren't the slightest use, but the Germans weren't going to throw them away. There were areas which were entirely full of human hair. There was a terrible area which was entirely full of wooden legs and crutches and artificial limbs. And the most pathetic area of all, an area which was just full of little tin chamber pots that children who'd come to the camp had brought with them and that the Germans had collected. Well, by this time I was in a pretty low frame of mind. And the most awful thing was that there were pictures in the corridors of prisoners, which were just the ordinary picture, you know, front, face, number on the bottom. But many of them were pictures of quite young people, children. And to see these pictures of people taken as if they were criminals, with the tears streaming down their face, was just unbearable. Well, then we drove over to the pond, and we had arranged that I was just going to say a piece to close that program at the pond, which would arise out of what I'd seen in the morning. So I sort of walked up and down for 5 minutes, making up my mind what I was going to say. And then we did it. One take, and we go home. We had made up our minds that it was a piece which you couldn't possibly do twice. I mean, you just had to say what came into your mind. Yeah. And the thing that came into my mind, absolutely out of the blue, was the phrase from Oliver Cromwell that I quote: "I beseech you, in the bowels of Christ, think it possible you may be mistaken."
Do you find that personally more harrowing than your visit, and more moving on you as a scientist and a human being, than visiting, as you did, Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Yes. You see, of course, Nagasaki, in which I arrived late one night, was awful. But we all knew we could do something about that. I mean, every one of us was going to follow his conscience in doing something to try and prevent a repetition of Nagasaki. My friend William Penny chose his way. I chose my way. But each of us was clear that there was something human beings could do to prevent that kind of war, that kind of use of weapons. Our responsibility was brought home to us. And as a matter of fact, my responsibility was largely exercised in giving the lectures on science and human values and having people read them, and in fact thereby broaching the whole problem of scientific responsibility. But Auschwitz was just hopeless. You know, if a civilized country could allow that sort of bestiality to become part of its relation to other human beings, I just felt that the future had fallen in. That how were you ever going to make people understand that human beings are individual? You have to touch them. You have to know that every one of those children, every one of those chaps with a wooden leg and so on, were people, and however much they might be your enemies, you couldn't take on yourself that responsibility. I find it difficult to find the right words for that. You must see Program 11 and see them, but I want to explain one thing to you. See, the most awful thing about Auschwitz was that you realize that the people who had been killed in the gas ovens, they were just dead. They were the fortunate ones. But the people who shoved another lot of people into the gas oven next day, they were like characters out of Dante's Inferno, living an endless hell because they had lost all sense of human feeling and were going to repeat tomorrow the unutterable bestiality that they had practiced today.
Yes.